Well, it's starting already. The free agency talks are already swirling around the Toronto Blue Jays, and who's it centered around? We'll get right into that.
You are Locked On Blue Jays, your daily Toronto Blue Jays podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jays. Thank you for making Locked On Blue Jays your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Ooh, Carter, my man. I'm just so excited to get into free agent talks. I'm so ready. But before we do that, as always, I'm Braden Wasco. He's Carter First. You can find us on Twitter, Braden5 Wasco. Carter First, too, as well on Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Blue Jays. If you're new on YouTube, drop the subscription. If you're visiting from somewhere else or you're usually listen on one of the other million podcasting apps, go check out the YouTube anyway so you can be up to date with all the live streams, videos, shorts, everything that we bring to all of you. Discord link is in the description, so if you guys want to join there, you can talk Blue Jays with us any time of day. But Carter, I just can't wait. Here we are. Free agent talks already going into 2025. The big name on the docket is Anthony Santander, as you can see from our little graphic that's like this way on Anthony Santander. So I am so excited, dude. This is a guy that I projected was going to be a Toronto Blue Jay. But there's a lot of factors that go into Anthony Santander. I'm going to start this to you. How do you feel just about Anthony Santander? Take out the contract, take out the talks of the Blue Jays, just Anthony Santander as a whole.
One thing we've talked about a lot recently, and this might be counterintuitive to Anthony Santander and the argument coming to the Toronto Blue Jays, is we need home runs on the Toronto Blue Jays. We need a power bat. We need somebody that can drive the ball, whether it's in the gaps, out of the ballpark, just someone that can drive runners in. And Anthony Santander fits that really well, but Anthony Santander also is kind of just a sellout power hitter. I don't want to say that completely, but power is his main statistic. And you know how Ross Atkins, as we've talked about multiple times recently, views power. So like you're not getting Anthony Santander for his defense. You're not necessarily getting him for his contact. He's a lower average guy. You're getting this guy to hit home runs and drive the ball into the gaps. And Ross Atkins, that's something we're going to have to talk about. It doesn't like power. So I think it's going to be interesting to see if they do engage in these contract talks. But I really hope they do at least call Anthony Santander and see what some numbers are and things like that. But it doesn't really seem like the Ross Atkins prototypical player that he wants to sign in free agency.
Yeah, so I'm just going to go over Anthony Santander, sort of his last year's stats, his career averages. Let's just give the people a quick breakdown. Anthony Santander, 30-year-old, bats. He's a switch hitter. He throws right, for those of you that need to know that. And then let's get into his 2024 stats. 155 games played. He had a batting average of .235, an on-base percentage of .308, a slugging of .506, and an OPS of .814. He did hit 44 home runs this season and was an all-star for the first time in his career. Now, that all sounds great. Carter, I want to go over the guy's career averages as well. So Anthony Santander in his 8-year career is batting .246 with an on-base percentage of .307, a slugging of .469, and an OPS of .776. Now, this is the conversation piece for Anthony Santander. This was his biggest season in 2024, his best year. The amount of home runs he hit was astronomical. It was great. That is what you want to see, and that's what the Blue Jays need. The question is it sustainable, and will he do it again? Everybody has to remember that this was a contract year. That is a big component here of how much do you trust that he can now go and repeat what he did last year. And I don't think we need to see 44 home runs, but I think you for sure need to see 30.
Yeah, that's the first issue is we always talk about we don't want to necessarily sell players at their low when there's a million players like that on the Toronto Blue Jays. Anthony Santander is at the opposite end of that spectrum. He had the best season of his career, 44 home runs is going to be a very attractive number to multiple baseball teams, not just the Toronto Blue Jays. So with that, with Santander, again, when you look at his career, the next highest home run total is 33. And that's something you're probably more realistically going to see from Anthony Santander. With this signing, you can't go into it as Toronto Blue Jays fans thinking that he's going to hit 44, 45 and build on that number, because you're just ultimately going to get disappointed. I don't see that no matter where Anthony Santander goes, even if somehow he goes to the Los Angeles Dodgers with that lineup, I don't see him hitting even about 40 home runs. So that's going to be the first major thing is with these contract talks, is with a guy that is on a contract year. He's going to base it off the most recent season, obviously, because that's the most recent thing that you can look at. There's 150-ish games of Anthony Santander's game tape that you can look at, and obviously just throughout his career in the last 3 seasons, which I kind of want to specify on, because at the end of the day, the 44 home runs was the outlier. I think this is going to be probably Anthony Santander's highest home run total of his career. Again, if the Toronto Blue Jays sign him, I hope he hits 65 home runs. I hope he has Aaron Judge numbers at the plate. But we got to try to be realistic with this signing. So over the last 3 seasons with Anthony Santander, he's averaged 35 home runs, 95 RBIs, and a 795 OPS. Those are pretty good numbers. And as we said, we had a listener question. We didn't necessarily put a number on the range, but we said relatively, if I had to put a number on it, 3 years, if you have 3 years of consistency, that's going to push me a lot farther for a reason that you should join the Toronto Blue Jays compared to a guy that had one unbelievable season. When you compare these stats of Vladimir Guerrero Jr., so over the last 3 seasons, Santander had 35 home runs on average. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is at 29. Santander's RBIs over the last 3 seasons on average is 95. Vladdy's is 98. And his OPS on average for Santander is 795, and Vladdy's is 849. One thing that you can also attribute to this is the Baltimore Orioles lineup is a million times better than the Toronto Blue Jays lineup. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., especially in 2024, had no one to hide behind. It was, you could pitch around Vladimir Guerrero Jr. You were not worried if you put him on first base for free, because who else is going to do damage in that lineup? Are you worried about Alejandro Kirk? Are you worried about Daulton Varsho? Are you worried about maybe Spencer Horwitz? I can see you being slightly worried about. But you got Anthony Santander, you have Gunnar Henderson, you have Adley Rutschman, you have all these guys that are hanging behind him that he can't really, you're going to have to go after Anthony Santander, because if you walk Anthony Santander, it doesn't get a lot easier in that lineup. So that is something you got to take into account for. It's really going to come down to, for me, is just how much you're willing to pay this guy. Because over the last 3 seasons, he's shown that he's going to be one of your best players. Especially when you look at the Toronto Blue Jays, the home run numbers, even if over the last 3 seasons you take that averages, better than Vladdy's, that would be number 1 on the Toronto Blue Jays. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. hit 30 home runs last season. Anthony Santander hit 44. So that is a big margin that you do have to account for. And again, he's not going to hit 44 home runs every year. The Toronto Blue Jays desperately need another home run hitter, and somebody for Vladdy, just yes, if he can get on base, or if Santander can get on base. Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has more opportunities to hit with people on base, or the vice versa. It's probably what's going to end up happening if he comes here. Vladdy's going to hit first because he gets on base more, and then Santander is going to have that ability to drive in those runners. So it's just going to help Vladdy in the long run. It's going to help the rest of the team as well, and obviously it's going to help the offense in totality.
Yeah, and we'll get into contract talks and what it would look like in the second segment here. But you're right, Carter. This is a guy that would fit the where this Toronto Blue Jays team is heading very well. We need that guy that can surround Vladdy. We've talked about it in so many of our episodes already, that Vlad, like you said, has nowhere to go. He has nowhere to hide. He needs to be the best. We need Bichette to be at his best, and you need another guy or two even to surround those two. And Anthony Santander fits that mold. Vladdy is a high average guy who hits for power. He's a superstar. He is this team's superstar. There's no doubt about it. But you need a secondary guy. You have Aaron Judge. You also have Juan Soto and Giancarlo Stanton. Got 2 other guys that can hit home runs and can crush the long ball, drive in those runs when you need it. The Blue Jays need another guy, like I said, or 2 that can do that with Vladdy. So Anthony Santander would be a perfect fit here. And there has been many articles talking about this from Sporting News. There's been a few other ones. That's just to bring up just one. And everybody sees the fit. I think everybody, as fans, as reporters, as everyone, knows that Anthony Santander would be the right piece for this team. The biggest question is, how does Ross Atkins view Anthony Santander? And it might come all down to the talk about money, and we'll get into that. But if the Blue Jays can't land a guy, and probably won't, like Juan Soto, is Anthony Santander the next best option? That's a good question. And maybe we'll get into another guy of Alex Bregman. But if those are the 2 guys that you surround Vladimir Guerrero Jr. with, I think you're very happy with the offseason that you made.
I'd be happy with one of them at this point. Let's just see anything from Ross Atkins. Obviously, our confidence is at an all-time low. I think a lot of other Toronto Blue Jays fans' confidence is at an all-time low, especially when you had the most blaringly obvious problems at the end of the 2023 season and just the lack of addressing the obvious problems. And then you just have the Ross Atkins press conference, which, again, we're going to continue to talk about because it is so prevalent to the Toronto Blue Jays organization, because this guy is at the helm of your ship. This guy is the guy that is going to construct your roster, whether we like that or not, for the 2025 season. So if you can get a guy like Anthony Santander, I think that's a more of a realistic thing than a guy like Juan Soto, because you look at the Toronto Blue Jays, we always say, again, we'll get more into the contract of Anthony Santander in the second segment, but Toronto Blue Jays just don't go over the luxury tax. It's not something they necessarily do. The New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers, New York Mets, money has no value to them. So with a guy like Juan Soto, obviously he is the guy in the market, the number one guy that everyone is going to want. I just don't see the Blue Jays winning a bidding war against some of these teams for a guy like Juan Soto. I think, again, if you have to settle, and that settle isn't even the right word for it, but for Anthony Santander compared to Juan Soto, that's really, you're not hurting yourself too much compared to last season where you had Shohei Ohtani or bust. So there is some backup options this season, which is nice. But with Santander, it could be Santander. Like, he would be a very good fit there. It could be Alex Bregman. It could be, again, a lot of the guys that we're going to talk about in this offseason. We need power. We need it so badly. And one obvious thing that is very nice if you sign Anthony Santander, that means he's not going back to the Baltimore Orioles. That makes the Baltimore Orioles worse. That makes Toronto Blue Jays better. So right there, you get a little bit of satisfaction taking a guy away from your rivals and a guy that is going to hit home runs when you had Vladdy hitting 30 and you had, Daulton Varsho next up at 19.
Yeah.
It's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we talk about. You need the home run ball. You need those guys that are going to hit 25, 30 home runs to surround Vlad. You can't have one guy at 30 and think everything's going to be all right. But Carter, in saying that, we've talked a lot about the money. We've sort of danced around it a little bit. Let's get into that in this next segment. But before we do that, when we kick off the next segment, I got a little bit of a question for you. But we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back, and I'll hit you with that on the other side.
Today's episode is sponsored by Prize Picks. So obviously during the Jays season, we watch pretty much every single Toronto Blue Jays game. Now we're really into the NHL. Obviously, I'm trying to make Braden into an NFL fan as well, and he's really embracing that. But we always find ourselves making these little side wagers, predicting the next play, whether it's football, it's a deep pass, or hockey, who's going to score the next goal. But we always find ourselves making the little wagers, and it's always fun when I prove myself to Braden because I'm usually right and he's usually wrong. But it also is beneficial because I make these picks on Prize Picks and I can actually add to my bank account as well. So don't miss your chance to add your favorite players from the ice, from the court, wherever it is, into your Prize Picks entries, whether it's goals, shots, yards, things like that. Obviously, so many things to pick on Prize Picks. You can throw those into your entries today. You know which players are going to perform on specific nights. This is a no-brainer. Download Prize Picks and start making your entries today. You can download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Run your game.
So, Carter, I said I had a question for you. Now, do you think the Baltimore Orioles getting bounced in the first round has anything to do with the reason why, or, well, speculatory reason why, that Anthony Santander will or won't go back to the Baltimore Orioles?
I don't think so. I don't think it's that at all. I think it's you look at the prospect system with the Baltimore Orioles. You look at some of the guys that you're going to have to pay in the future. And Anthony Santander, obviously at his age, 30 years old, he's probably going to want a contract that is 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 years, as we'll get into. So I don't think the Baltimore Orioles are necessarily looking to add a guy like that when they have so much of a young core that, again, it's all projected. It's not for sure what they're going to end up doing, but they hope that some of these prospects can work out, have some corner outfield positions, because they still have some guys in the AAA that are literally MLB ready. They just have nowhere to put them because they have so many prospects. So I don't think it's the first round exit at all. I just think Anthony Santander is going to want to get the bag, and I don't think the Baltimore Orioles are going to necessarily be willing to give him the contract that he's looking for.
Well, it'd be hard to say that, oh, the Baltimore Orioles got bounced in the first round, but then go to the Toronto Blue Jays, who didn't touch the playoffs. But, it always is something in your mind of where you see the potential for your career. So, yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that there's just not going to be room for Anthony Santander on that Baltimore Orioles lineup. And I think that that's where all these articles and everything are going to, and that the Toronto Blue Jays have a need, and Anthony Santander could fill those needs. In saying that, Carter, let's get into the contract talk. That's the big one. That's what everybody's going to want to know, and that's going to dictate where Anthony Santander ends up. There has been a lot of different ideas thrown around. It started off at being 5 years, 100 million. That seems unlikely to me. There has also been talks about 5 years, 115 million, which ends up to be an average value of $23 million. And then I know you saw one. It was a 7-year, $150 million deal.
Which is 21.4 million per. But obviously with that contract, you have 2 more years of Anthony Santander and his 36 and 37 age season. So is it really worth the $1.5 million to have him for an extra 2 years when you get that little bit of a cut? And this is all projected, as we see with Shohei Ohtani, as we're going to see with Juan Soto this offseason, as hopefully we can see with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. as well. I don't really care what that monetary value is. But it's usually these projections when you end up going to these bidding wars, when you have all these teams that are into these players that have the ability to spend big money in the open market. Usually these projections go underneath what actually ends up happening. So Anthony Santander, like a 5-year, $100 million contract, sign me up immediately if that's exactly what it is. I don't see that at all. So the problem with Anthony Santander is the contract year, and the 44 home runs, obviously, as we said, is going to stand out. I think that might cause a bidding war for a lot of teams. Like the Los Angeles Dodgers are going to be in on Anthony Santander. The New York Mets are another team that's in. Detroit Tigers might be a team that's in after this last season, a team that's also been linked to Alex Bregman. So they're trying to make a big splash. There's going to be a lot of teams that are going to be linked to Anthony Santander. So are the Toronto Blue Jays, for one, going to be able to pay 25, 30? Is Ross Atkins going to want to do that? And should they even do that?
Well, Carter, we talked about it. The Blue Jays have about $50 million to spend. And that is to get probably 2 to 3 positional players and then bolster the bullpen. So that's a lot of needs for $50 million when Anthony Santander could take 25 million of that himself. And if you want to sign a guy like Alex Bregman as well, I mean, you're dwindling your money right there. So in saying that, I think for Anthony Santander, if you're willing to pay 25 million, 23 million, I think that's reasonable. I think that's doable because then you still have some room to work. But if it starts to get up near 30 million, Carter, I don't know how the Toronto Blue Jays feasibly do that and still have money to then go and bolster the bullpen or add in other positions. I would love to have Anthony Santander. That's where I'm at. But too much money is too much money. And if they are not willing to spend over the luxury tax, that might just screw them.
Well, and you made a good point with the Toronto Blue Jays not necessarily being the most attractive spot if Anthony Santander wants to win. So one thing, I'm going to kind of give you a perspective here of which one you'd be more inclined to accept if you were a Toronto Blue Jays manager. So obviously Santander is 30 years old. I'm thinking he's going to be more inclined to sign a very long contract, maybe have the dollar value be a little bit lower than expected, but he's probably going to be want to inked up for at least 5 years at minimum. So for this example, we'll go with the 7-year instead. We'll go with the 7-year, $150 million contract. You have that as an option, or you have a 3-year contract, but you're paying Anthony Santander $30 million for each of those 3 years. So those 3 years, obviously, you're probably going to have more of Anthony Santander in his prime. You're going to get like not the 44 home runs, but you're going to get similar to what it's been over the last 3 seasons. You sign that 7-year contract, obviously way less in the value. Again, if it's in the next 3 years, probably more likely that you're going to sign that contract. But the last 2 years of that contract are probably going to be very hard to watch if you're paying Anthony Santander 21.5-ish million. So which one would you be more likely to go to?
Well, it's tough. And it's not which one would I be more willing to go to. I think it's obvious that I would want the 3-year. But I don't think that $30 million this season is very likely for the Blue Jays to sign anybody. And so you're left with the 7-year. And I don't think that they want to necessarily do that either. So that's a tough question. I like Anthony Santander. I think he would fit perfectly, as we talked about. But unless it's a 5-year close to the $25 million mark, I don't think that this works out. I don't know.
It's a tough scenario because when you look at Toronto, again, with Anthony Santander, the way he's at with his contract, where he's at with his age, things like that, obviously going into this year, having a career year, I think if you're at 30 years old, I'm not going to necessarily say that his best years are behind him, but I think his best year is behind him. I don't think, again, there's not going to be a drop off where I think Anthony Santander's floor is relatively 22, 23 home runs. Again, you're not going to get the average necessarily, but I'm not necessarily looking for an average when you have a guy like Anthony Santander. And it's a lot of these other teams, like the New York Yankees, the Los Angeles Dodgers, I don't think they're going to be as inclined to sign Santander for that like 7-year contract. And if it would come down to more of this bridge deal, I think they're going to outbid the Toronto Blue Jays anyway. So I think the only way the Toronto Blue Jays end up getting Anthony Santander is, unfortunately, if they do that 5 or 7 year deal. They pay a little bit less per year, but you're going to have to deal with Anthony Santander sort of at the end of his career. The unfortunate thing kind of that we're going through with George Springer right now. And as hard as that's been with George Springer in his third last year with the Toronto Blue Jays, still got 2 more years of George Springer. Anthony Santander being a worse fielder, if the hitting ever goes with Anthony Santander, this guy's going to be a pumpkin in your lineup at the age of 36 and 37. But again, that's a long time away. That's not necessarily something we have to worry about right now. You want the Toronto Blue Jays to be good right now on that contract. There's definitely reasons why there could be benefits to signing Anthony Santander to a long-term deal.
Well, and this might come down to the fact that Ross Atkins needs to make something happen. He needs it for his own career. So if that is signing that 7-year deal and maybe saying, well, I probably won't have to deal with this at the 6-7 year mark, he might be very inclined to pull the trigger on that deal. And again, I don't love it because I know in 6-7 years, I'm not going to be thrilled with the stage the Toronto Blue Jays are at with an aging Vladdy, an aging Bo, and an old Anthony Santander. But at the end of the day, I do understand it from a Ross Atkins perspective, because if you're trying to save your job, you would do anything in the world to make that happen. So it is going to be interesting. And just to see sort of everything at play here, Ross Atkins already talked that Anthony Santander, his, how he is as a player isn't what the Toronto Blue Jays are looking, but Anthony Santander to the fans and to everybody else seems like a very, very good option. So there's so many little pieces and components that go into this. I don't know. I'm pretty excited. And that's why this is such an entertaining offseason and probably one of the most important, as we discussed, ever in Toronto Blue Jays history, because there is a lot on the line for this team.
Well, what it came down to going into this offseason was, were the Toronto Blue Jays going to rebuild or were they going to retool? And if you're Ross Atkins, if you know that if you go into a rebuild, your job is as good as gone. So that's a very good point actually to bring up. Is Ross Atkins going to care what happens in 3 to 4 years if he's not even here anyway? Absolutely not. He's just trying to save his job. He's trying to set the Blue Jays up for the short-term success. And I think at this point, with the way the Ross Atkins experience is going, he is willing to sacrifice the long-term sanity of Toronto Blue Jays fans and the organization if he can stay within the organization and be getting his paycheck every single time that it comes out for him. So it's a tough situation where that's where your manager's at. He's fighting for his life. And I feel like other teams around the league know that as well. They know that Ross Atkins is on his last limbs with the Toronto Blue Jays, and he's going to be willing to do almost anything to keep his job, at least for this season, for the Toronto Blue Jays. So that does make an overpay for a guy like Anthony Santander, for a guy like Alex Bregman, for any other guys that we will talk about in this free agency. Way more likely to get an overpayment with these guys. And also, when we talk about the Shohei Ohtani experience, a lot of reports came out as Shohei Ohtani never really wanted to come to the Toronto Blue Jays. It was just a leverage call. That's all it was. The Toronto Blue Jays top 10 payroll in baseball. They're willing to spend. They use that as leverage with teams that he actually wanted to go to in the Los Angeles Dodgers. Again, it's not confirmed, but there's have been reports of this. For me, I can't help to think that there is a little bit of validity in those reports.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's totally understandable. The Blue Jays are being used as leverage for teams like the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Mets, these teams that are going to spend a ton of money. So I don't know, Carter. At the end of the day, this is just going to be a fun offseason. And I think for us, especially since we have this podcast, we're going to be locked right in. When a big signing happens, we'll make sure we'll try to go live for you guys and everything. And hopefully we actually get a few of those big signings, but we'll have to wait and see. In saying that, Carter, I never actually teed this up, but we have another Blue Jays question of the day. So we'll take a quick break, and we're got to get into that because it's a fun one today. It's not anything super serious, but it is fun. Hopefully you guys will stick around and drop your answers to the question of the day as well in the comments. We'll be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. I don't know how many times I have to tell you that Game Time is the only place that I buy my tickets now because it's just unbeatable. It really is. They have their new Game Time picks. It curates it, makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, and theater. They have their new flash deals as well. Save even more with exclusive in-app deals on select seats ahead of your game or event. They have a bunch of these different deals. There's zone deals, flash deals, this Game Time picks. That's what I'm talking about. It is the cheapest way to get your tickets. They also have the all-in pricing, which is my favorite feature on Game Time because I want to know what my tickets are going to cost. I don't want to get into my cart and then, oh my goodness, it's an extra $30 on top of that. No, that's why their all pricing is fantastic. They have their seat views where you can get a panoramic view of your seat in-app before you buy the tickets. And they have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. So, Carter, this Blue Jays question of the day has sort of come out of the episode from Monday, actually. And I sort of was talking about how Freddie Freeman is my, second favorite player of all time. And then I got people asking, okay, well, what are your top 3 favorite players of all time and why? And so I figured let's get into it. I'm going to throw it over to you. Do you want to start and give me your top 3 favorite players of all time?
Yeah, I'll start with my number 1, and it's my favorite moment in Toronto Blue Jays history up until this point. And I grew up watching this guy, obviously through the air with the Toronto Blue Jays, where it was absolutely disgusting to see this guy launch home runs to the left field porch, and that is Jose Bautista. For me, my favorite player I've ever seen. So electric. The bat flip obviously just chills every single time. Whenever things go wrong in Toronto Blue Jays land, I go back to the bat flip. Yeah. I always think that it was once okay in Toronto Blue Jays land. So that is my number 1, Jose Bautista. Another clip that I do remember is, I can't remember who exactly it was, but it was a hard hit ball in the right field. Joey Bass just absolutely comes up rifling it to Edwin Encarnacion and guns him out from right field as well. Seeing him fired up and Edwin's reaction from that just reminds me of just better Toronto Blue Jays times, and kind of sticking along with this theme. I think this one might surprise you a little bit. I loved Mark Buehrle. I loved what Mark Buehrle was doing with the Toronto Blue Jays. The last time there was a complete game before the Kevin Gausman one, obviously. It's such a fun guy to watch. Just his seeing him get emotional on the mound and getting fired up. Definitely got me fired up as well when I was a little bit younger, obviously watching the games. And this is the one that I told you about before, but I definitely forgot. The reasoning is it's kind of sort of hilarious. So it's MLB 09. That's the first MLB that I had. And I just love doing my fantasy drafts in MLB. So I would always get this guy in the later rounds, and I would absolutely rake with them. And it made me kind of end up liking him and watching him a little bit more in real life. And that is Jim Thome.
Oh, totally fair. Yeah, okay.
I loved watching him play. Again, I didn't necessarily get the best parts of his career because, again, coming to the league 2002, I was born in 2002 for the people that don't know. So unfortunately, I'm not really taking too much in from Jim Thome playing baseball in 2002. Honestly, like 2000. Again, I'll probably say 2009. That's where I formed a lot of my first baseball memories with the Toronto Blue Jays. But I know 2 of yours. I'm not sure who your third one is. I know you talked about your first one a lot of time, and obviously you gave us the second one. But go over your top 3.
Yeah, so my favorite player of all time, obviously anybody that's a longtime listener to the podcast will know my favorite player is Josh Donaldson.
How many jerseys do you have?
Of Josh Donaldson?
Yeah.
6, 5? I'm missing. I tried to collect all of them. I don't have the New York Yankees one because I
would have burned it.
Yeah, I can't do it. So I'm missing that one. I'm missing a couple, but eventually I will collect them all. Number 2, Freddie Freeman. I've talked about that. I got his Dodgers jersey in the closet when we went down to LA a couple of years ago, or 2 years ago. And I've just always loved Freddie Freeman. He's always had a special place in my heart as a Canadian. So absolutely loved him. And number 3, this one might shock you actually. And it's R.A. Dickey.
I could see that.
Yeah. And so as kids, I mean, we'd be out, my friend Evan Erickson, we'd be throwing knuckleballs to each other just because R.A. Dickey. And it was so iconic. And I remember I was always a person that I had it was a curveball that just was like, it was gravity curve pretty much when I was a kid, but I'd throw it and it would work. So I don't know. And so I don't know. It was a weird pitcher with a weird pitch. And I was the only one throwing a curveball at 9 years old. So it just sort of correlated there for me.
Does this mean your number 4 favorite player is Josh Thole? Because he needed his personal catcher. You go back to the trade. It wasn't just R.A. Dickey. You need to throw Josh Thole in there as well.
Yeah, I guess so.
It's like peanut butter and jam when you talk about those 2 players.
Yeah, I guess we'll throw them in there, sure. But no, a fun question. Let us know in the comments who's your 3 favorite players of all time. We want to hear them. I know a lot of you guys will have different picks than us because I was born in 2000. He was born in 2002. So those are the guys that we saw growing up. Those are the guys that were big parts of us becoming baseball fans. So leave us your comment. Let us know who yours are, if we can understand it or not as Blue Jays fans. I know I actually had a Blue Jays fan that his favorite player ever was David Ortiz. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why, but okay. But yeah, if it's something weird like that, let us know too.
Hey, Big Poppy was fun to watch. You can't really hate on that. Just the
Yeah.
energy he brought to the diamond as well. And just obviously, like, as being born in 2002, I've kind of accustomed with a little bit of the Toronto Blue Jays history. If I would have watched Joe Carter hit that walk-off home run, I think that automatically would have put him at number one for me. And then Carlos Delgado's another guy, just watching some tape and things like that. I think another guy that I would have really taken a liking to. But unfortunately, yeah, just you're not living through it. So obviously, especially when you're growing up as a kid, I'm sure all of you guys watching have at least one player that you remember as a kid. You're like, this guy was awesome. I loved watching this guy play. It was one of the reasons that you were watching baseball in general. But I do want to end this off, kind of throwing it back to Anthony Santander with one final question. And that's the final contract. What is the max amount of money and like the max amount of years, whatever your ideal contract is, we'll say for Anthony Santander, but leave it on the higher side as like the highest monetary value to give him per year.
Okay. Before I go to that, shout out David Eckstein, number 4. Weird one, but there you go. Anyways, back to the Anthony Santander. My ideal one, if I'm looking at this, I don't want to pay him for 7 years. I understand the 7-year contract. I do, from an organizational point of view here. Ideally, it's 5 years, and it's no more than your 26 million, 27 million. I think if it even climbs close to that 28 mark, I don't know how that's possible. And you could build a good roster around a guy now you're paying 28 million per year, plus your Vladdy contract, plus your Bo contract, plus Springer, plus all these guys. It just doesn't seem feasible to me.
Yeah, the absolute longest that, again, I wouldn't love a 6-year contract, but I would be okay with it. The way I would lead to is 5 years and $25 million per. So the kind of the George Springer experience, just one less year. So you get $25 million per year. You get 5 years of Anthony Santander into the age 35 season. It kind of limits the downside of the back end of this guy's career. Maybe if he's playing good baseball and you sign him to a bridge deal where it's a 1 year, I don't know, $15 million contract, whatever. Again, it's hard to speculate what Anthony Santander is going to look like in 5 years. So if they wanted, again, extend the guy when he's 35 years old, I can see the fit there if he wants to just, be his DH, if he's still hitting 30 home runs a year. There's definitely a spot for that guy on a lot of baseball teams.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's going to be interesting to see what the contract comes out to. I think that's the point of this offseason, really, because there are so many big contracts that are going to have to be signed that it's going to be very interesting to see where everyone lands. But we'll keep you guys up to date on all of that, as we always try to do. Thank you guys for listening. We'll leave it here. If you want to go check out Locked On MLB, make sure you do that. Host Paul Sullivan just hosts a great show. And I know I say that after every episode, but it is a really fun show. And I hope you guys check that out as your second listen. We still appreciate being your first listen every day. In saying that, have a good Wednesday, and we'll sort of kick out of here for the rest of the day.